All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 17th of April, 2024, and this is the Cluster API Karpenter Feature Group meeting. This is a sub-project of Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which basically means please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated, or explicitly so. Please be kind to each other, and please raise your hand if you'd like to talk. Although there's only three of us, so I'm not going to stand on that second one. Okay, so unfortunately, my screen share isn't working with this version of Zoom. I need to do something to fix it. But you know, I invite you both to add yourself to the agenda, to the attendees if you like. I've only got a couple topics for today that I wanted to go through. I don't know. It sounded like Mike, maybe you didn't have any topics. Jeremy, did you have any topics that you wanted to add?
Nope, I don't really have any at the moment.
Okay. So the first topic I wanted to talk about was kind of making the repo public, because right now I've just got it in my own private account, and I have talked with the community about, like getting it into Kubernetes SIGs and everything. And I think I would like to do that when we get to a point where it's actually running and, does something. Because right now I'm trying to just push changes to the main branch, and that'll be tough once it's in Kubernetes SIGs, because, they'll turn on all the automation and everything for it. So it's not quite ready for public use yet, but what I've done is I've gone into the README and broken out like a to-do list of all the different like cloud provider interfaces that I'm working on, so that I can start like checking them off as we get closer. And I'm kind of working on setting up the testing infrastructure for it at the moment, so that we can have like a proper end test suite that we can use with all the, the various pieces as we start to build them out. So my main goal right now is to kind of get us to the first proof of concept where we could just see this working against a cluster API cluster. So yeah, I guess part of this is because I feel better having it open than closed, but I just wanted to see if anybody here had thoughts about it or opinions, or is there a reason I shouldn't open it up, or, even if it's not in a state where it can be used? It can at least be compiled now. It doesn't really do anything though. And welcome.
I'm just ecstatic that it's at that point that you're even talking about that. So
okay.
Hello.
Hey, pal. Unfortunately, my screen share isn't working with this version of Zoom right now, so I'm not able to share the agenda, but we're just talking about my first topic about making the repo more public.
Sure. All good.
So yeah, I guess I don't know, Mike. I mean, I don't think anyone's really going to be consuming it yet, but I guess just for the purposes of having it all, having like, development in the open and everything, like, I don't know, like, do you think there's any reason not to open it, even though it doesn't really do anything yet?
as long as the appropriate disclaimers on there, I see no problem with that at all. I mean, it's not like the Git history is not going to be there anyway when it eventually becomes open.
Right. Yeah, totally. Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks, Mike. Okay. So I guess I don't know, does anybody else have thoughts about that or opinions? If not, I'll just move on to the next topic. It's all good.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So the other topic I wanted to bring up was kind of some architectural choices that I'm being forced to make right now, to kind of get things working so that we could start looking at it. So the first one of those is probably the most controversial of the changes, and that is that I'm going to start by using a joined cluster for cluster API, so that I can back off on the client issues that we're dealing with. So for a little background here, in order for Karpenter to work the way we want it to with cluster API, we're going to need to be able to accommodate, management cluster and workload cluster configurations. And for Karpenter, what that means is that there are some objects that Karpenter uses, which are its own node objects. And then there are, or node claim and node pool objects. And then there are objects that Cluster API uses, like machines and machine sets and those kind of things. Those will most likely be in the management cluster, but then Karpenter will need to read all of its pods and nodes from the workload cluster. And the way that Karpenter works at the moment is that Karpenter assumes a single cluster. So it only needs one client one kube client to be passed into it to do all of its work. So I had started a few weeks ago to investigate the possibility of making like a multiplexing client, which I think is possible. But the more I got into it, the more I noticed that, okay, I could spin my wheels on that multiplexing client for a long time, and it doesn't actually get us to the point of demonstrating like Karpenter working. And also there is an effort that I think came out of the KCP project, which is now being discussed on the Kubernetes, one of the Kubernetes repos. And that is that Stefan Szymanski is proposing like an idea where you could have a client that could get resources from multiple clusters. And if that goes forward, we could totally use that as our, client that could talk to both. So I think the first thing, I'm going to try to just get this working on a joined cluster so that I can keep a single client for the moment. And then, as hopefully as the upstream progress on this multi-cluster client gets better, then we could lean into using that, maybe just replace everything and hopefully it'll work. And if not, we'll spend time writing the multiplexing client. So we'd still have a single client being passed through, but it would be able to multiplex between different clusters based on, the object type and whatnot. Yeah, Mike, please.
I think I heard you say that the node claims will end up showing on the management cluster. Is that what you said?
Yes.
So will those be in, if you were to go the multiplexing route, it would be namespace reads for those node claims?
Right.
I'm just thinking of the case, where we have, what do we have, Jeremy? 30,000, 40,000 nodes. We're going to start hitting it. We're trying to grab all of those across, the cluster scoped read. We start, hitting some serious performance issues. And so I'm just double checking how you were thinking about that.
So yeah, like some of this is drafting off of like how I've heard cluster API users talking about their management clusters. I think like what we'd like to lean into is the notion of like namespaced isolation for cluster resources. So if you're the type of user who puts like a single cluster in a single namespace, then this would work perfectly for you because you would put Karpenter in the same namespace and you would set all your RBAC so that the service account can only read like that namespace. And that's where the node claims would be. That's where the machine objects would be, et cetera. I think
Okay.
it gets more complicated when we talk about users who want to just have, a CAPI namespace, right? And so they would want Karpenter running in there, and they might have multiple copies of Karpenter running in there, that's where it's going to get really complicated, I think.
Okay. Yeah, we were that first use case with the different namespace per cluster.
That seems to be very common, especially for users who have larger installations. I think where I tend to see people putting it all in one namespace is when, it's a very small installation or, maybe like if clusters spread across like 50 nodes or something like that, Okay. So if there's no other questions or comments about that one, I'll move on to kind of the next topic here. So the next topic is how do we know machines are owned by Karpenter? And to begin with, I'm making up like a label. I'm drafting off of the way that other Karpenter labels are created and the way that we've created labels in the cluster autoscaler. So what I'm doing is creating some specific like Karpenter based or Karpenter prefixed labels. So they look like, cluster API dot Karpenter.sh / whatever the thing is. And I'm going to use that so that I can quickly just kind of allow Karpenter to grab all the machines that it's owning at the moment by, filtering on this label. In the future, we might want to do this differently. We might want to use like ownership references or something to build this out. But I thought this was just a simple way to get things off the ground. And it would be easy for users to know then, oh, this machine's being managed by, by Karpenter. So I guess yeah, Mike, please.
Yeah, so I totally agree. Short term, that's good. Longer term, if I remember correctly, one of the use cases we talked about was being able to delete a node from the management cluster to have it impact the workload cluster. Would in the cluster API use case, that machine object, would the user be deleting that? Or the node claim the Karpenter does? Because if they're deleting the machine object, you would have to have the owner references in order to make sure the cascading and the actual draining that Carpenter would do of the node actually takes effect. So longer term, I think that probably would be necessary.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so like some of this will probably get into how we decide to like how much we want, if we want to really make the ownership look like it's coming from Carpenter. Carpenter creates a node claim, you know, and then the node claim is kind of what it wants to keep around as the object that talks about what, you know, what is happening with this specific node. So it might be in the future that we would have like the machine object might actually be owned by the node claim. And so deleting the node claim would be what we want to do. Or we want it the other way, where the user could delete the machine and the node claim gets deleted automatically so that Carpenter knows. I guess it depends, like, it depends how we look at this. Are you like a cluster API user first, or are you a Carpenter user first, right? And then we'll have to figure out which one makes more sense. Does it make more sense for the user to delete the node claim to get rid of the node? Or does it make more sense for them to get rid of the machine? Or, and I think this might be the preferred way in Carpenter, are you supposed to annotate the node that you want Carpenter to get rid of, and then it will get rid of it for you? Although
Yeah.
that may not help users who need to like get rid of a machine, right?
Yeah, and all of that is exactly what I think deciding on the owner references order, is going to be kind of important.
Yeah, great question. And I'm keeping a document that I'm gonna put into the repo with this of like all the kind of open questions that we need to answer over time. Like I've captured some of them now, but like this is one of them, you know, like the pricing question is like another one that we're gonna have to solve. And like, you know, all these things are things that we'll have to kind of get into. Yeah, Jeremy.
Yeah, on that topic, from my perspective in working with Carpenter, trying to do our migrations here, and think about how we document like the right way to take care of these nodes and delete them. Like I find it unhelpful in the Carpenter documentation that they say, well, you can go delete the node object or you can go delete the node claim, and either way it does the right thing. It's like, that's great, but I want to be able to tell people, like, you do one thing, right? This is the correct way to do it. And contextually, like I'm going to document things from delete the node claim perspective, because if we don't have Carpenter, right, we're dealing with nodes. If we have Carpenter, now we're dealing with node claims. And if we're going to the CAPI world, it would be machine object, delete the machine object. That case, cascades to the node claim, which cascades to the node. So that would be my preference there.
Yeah, I tend to agree with your kind of wisdom about this. It's like, yeah, like we don't want to swamp users with like too many ways to do this. Like just being able to just say, yeah, just delete the machine and that, it all go away. I agree with that. Like I think when we get to the point where we're kind of organizing around those things, yeah, we probably should just come up with one preferred way to do this. And it's like creative users might figure out other things, but we're documenting one thing. Cool. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Anything else on this topic, or should I move on to the next one? All right, I'll move on to the next one then. So similarly, so the way I've been approaching this, and if you were at the previous meeting, which I know Mike was, like, I've been approaching this from the perspective of using infrastructure machine templates as the way to know what type of machines that Carpenter can make, right? And the reason that I've been following this is based on the orphan machine process, right? In order to make a machine object, I need to know what the infrastructure machine template is, and I need to know a boot config, and I need to put them together and allow a machine to be made. So the infrastructure templates are kind of the source of truth in terms of like, what are the shape of these instances that could come into the cluster. So what I'm focusing on at the moment is that cluster API, and I was trying to describe this in the meeting, but like Carpenter, uses the node pool to define like how it will create nodes. And within that node pool, you give it a reference to a node class. And that node class is tied to a specific, infrastructure provider and has the details about you know, what it needs to do to make nodes and to learn about what nodes are there. In the cluster API world, what I was thinking was for a first pass at this node class, what we would do is we would have a reference to a type of machine template, right? So you could say like, you know, the type is Docker template, and this is the API version. And then there would be a list of names. And so when Karpenter wants to know what kind of instances can I create, we would load all those templates by name, look at the capacity information in them, and then pass that to Karpenter for making decisions. There's a lot of different ways that we could do this. And this was just kind of the first one that occurred to me in terms of, okay, this will just be simple and straightforward to do. But in the future, we might want to create more complicated patterns. And I realize even saying that is probably, you know, I'm starting to laugh at myself already, but, you know, but we could create different kinds of patterns that maybe use labels where like when you create a node class, the user could specify like what labels they want, you know, what type of infrastructure template, and then what labels they want it to scan for. And that way you wouldn't have to have all the names in there. You could just, you know, create new templates that just had a specific label and you knew they would get updated. So I think these are some options to think about as we go forward, and kind of like, you know, maybe Jeremy, since you've been doing a lot of work, you know, migrating things to Karpenter and doing that, you know, maybe some of your experience here might be useful. But from the user perspective, you know, how can we make this easy for a user to inform Karpenter about what types of machines are available and then allow it to happen? And then, you know, users presumably will want to update the machine types and everything. So how to make that easy for them as well. So anyways, so to begin with, I think I'm just going to do it by name in the cluster class or in the node class. But in the future, we might want to change that to be, you know, I guess a more filter style or layered style of, you know, of processing. I don't know. Does anybody have thoughts about that?
I'm always a fan of label selectors. You know, there's the number of times I've been bitten by the fact that I have to provide some sort of single list or comma delimited list versus just using a label selector has been aggravating.
Yeah.
um,
That's what I was thinking too, is that like if a user wanted to like quickly add new machine types so that Karpenter knew about them, they would have to like add the infrastructure templates, then update the node class with the names of the infrastructure templates they just added. And that might be like a pain in the ass. So like if they could just use labels, then they could specify one class type in the one reference type in the node class and a bunch of labels. And then it would say, okay, yeah, I'll just use these labels and do it that way. So maybe I'll just do that instead, Mike, just to kind of shortcut this like trip or whatever. Any other thoughts or comments on that one? I'm gonna add people to the agenda too. I hope you don't mind. So I guess that's all the topics that I wanted to talk about. Are there questions or topics that other folks want to talk about before we close it off here, or should we take like 9 minutes back? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up or anything. I will probably work on making the repo public once I clean it up a little more, and appreciate the advice from everyone and the ideas here, and we'll just keep pushing it forward. Hopefully we'll have something to share in the next couple weeks. All right, thanks everybody.
sounds great.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
have a
Bye.
good
Good.
one.
Thanks. Bye.